This weekend, only at Macy's, it's our lowest prices of spring. How low? Diamond rings, pendants, and earrings, only $399, originally $1,500. Ninja blenders, now $89.99. And $395 men's designer suits, only $99.99. So if you're wondering why you should shop Macy's lowest prices sale, well, the name pretty much says it all. It's our lowest prices for one weekend only. Starts tomorrow at Macy's. Savings off already reduced prices. Exclusions apply.
Welcome back to another episode of Bloodstained Backstories. I'm your host, Jace.
And I'm your host, Summer.
Today we will cover the horrific murder of Shanda Sharer, a beautiful 12-year-old girl who was brutally tortured and murdered out of jealousy.
Shanda Renee Sharer was just 12 years old at the time of her death. She was still young enough to be spending her weekends with friends, having sleepovers, playing board games, and starting to experiment with makeup with her friends. She was too young to become a household name based on the brutality of her murder and the fact that her murderers were not much older than she was.
Shanda was born on June 6, 1979 in Kentucky. Her parents were Stephen Sharer and Jacqueline Vaught, who remarried after their divorce and moved to Louisville. Shanda was on the cheerleading, volleyball, and softball teams in 5th and 6th grade. When her mother divorced again, they moved to New Albany, Indiana. Shanda was enrolled in middle school at Hazelwood Middle School, but early in the school year transferred to Our Lady of Pepinchua Help School, a Catholic school in New Albany, and there she joined the school's basketball team.
The girls that tortured and ended up murdering Shanda were Melinda Lovelace, Lori Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Tony Lawrence. Now, before we discuss the events that lead up to Shanda's murder, let us learn a little bit about each of these girls.
Melinda Lovelace was born on October 28, 1975 in New Albany. She was the youngest of 3 daughters born to Marjorie and Lori Lovelace. Her father, Larry, was drafted into the Vietnam War in the U.S. Army, where he reached the rank of sergeant. He was treated like a hero upon his return home, but he was emotionally scarred. Marjorie, his wife, at one point described him as a sexual deviant who would wear her and her daughter's underwear and makeup. He was incapable of staying monogamous, and he suffered from a mixture of jealousy and fascination seeing her have sex with other men and women. Larry worked a variety of jobs, but never one for very long. Marjorie worked intermittently since 1974, when both parents were working with the family was financially well off. Larry was abusive and violent and usually spent the money he made working on himself purchasing firearms, motorcycles, and cars. He very rarely shared his earnings with the family, and in 1980 he filed for bankruptcy. Family members described the Lovelace marriage as exactly that. Loveless. The girls were often hungry and not receiving enough food at home. The Loveless parents frequented bars in Louisville. Larry would pretend he was a doctor and he would introduce his wife as his girlfriend. He would also share her with some of the friends at work. Marjorie found this to be disgusting. She attempted to commit suicide several times throughout their daughter's childhoods. Larry went as far as having his wife gang raped. After that act, she refused to have sex with him for a month until he finally had enough and raped her. The children heard all this through the closed door. In the summer of 1986, Larry beat Marjorie so severely that she would not let him bring 2 women home from the bar, and she was hospitalized, and he would later be convicted of battery. It is unclear to what extent Larry abused his daughters and other children. There are various court testimonies that claim Larry fondled Melinda as an infant. He molested his wife's sister, who was 13 at the time. Early in their marriage, molested a girl's cousin for 4 years. A cousin described the event where Larry tied all 3 sisters in the garage and raped them. Melinda has never admitted that this has happened to her. Melinda did sleep in bed with him until she was 14. Larry was also verbally abusive to his daughters and loved embarrassing them by finding their underwear and smelling it in front of family members. When Melinda was 5, the family became deeply involved in the Graceland Baptist Church. The parents gave full confessions, quitting drinking, and swinging while they were members. Larry became a Baptist lay preacher, and his wife became the school nurse. Melinda was taken to a motel room by a 50-year-old man for a 5-hour exorcism that the church had arranged. At one point, Larry became a marriage counselor with the church. He gained a reputation of being very forward with women and tried to rape one of them. After that incident, they left the church and returned to their former professions and drinking. In November 1990, Larry was caught spying on Melinda and a friend. Marjorie would attack him with a knife. He attempted to grab the knife, which ended up with him going to the hospital. Marjorie attempted suicide again, and the girls called the authorities. After this, Larry filed for divorce and moved to Florida and was remarried. Melinda was crushed by this, especially after he remarried. Larry did send letters to Melinda for a while, but eventually severed all contact with her. He was killed in a car accident in Missouri on December 16, 1998. And this, by far, is not a normal or healthy childhood for those children to grow up in.
Next we have Mary Lorraine, called Lori, Tackett. She was born on October 5, 1974 in Madison, Indiana. Her father was a factory worker and had 2 felony charges from the 1960s, and her mother was a fundamentalist Pentecostal Christian. Lori claimed she was molested at the ages of 5 and 12. In May of 1989, her mother discovered that Lori would bring jeans to school and change out of her dress into the jeans. Lori and her mother had a confrontation about the situation, and Lori's mother attempted to strangle her. Social workers became involved, and Lori's parents agreed to unannounced visits to make sure there was no child abuse occurring. Lori and her mother would have conflicts. Another such conflict was when Lori's mother found out that Hope Rippey's dad had bought a Ouija board for the girls to play with. Lori's mother went to Hope's house and demanded that the board be burned and that the Rippey's house be exorcised. That seems a little bit excessive. After Lori's 15th birthday, Lori started to become rebellious. At this time, she also became fascinated with the occult. She would pretend to be possessed by the spirit of Deanna the vampire to try to impress her friends. Early in 1991, Lori began to engage in self-harm when a girl she was dating was involved with the practice. March 19, 1991, Lori's parents discovered the self-mutilation and checked her into a hospital. The hospital prescribed her antidepressants and released her. Lori, 2 days later, with a girlfriend and Tony Lawrence, cut her wrist so deeply that she was returned to the hospital. Lori was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and she told of experienced hallucinations since she was a young child. April 12th, she was discharged from the hospital. In September of 1991, she dropped out of school. In October of 1991, Lori was staying with friends. Lori spent most of her time in Louisville and New Albany, and most of the time with Melinda.
On June 9th, 1976, Hope Ann Rippey was born in Madison. Her parents divorced in February of 1989, and she moved with her mother and siblings to Quincy, Michigan for 3 years. In 1997, her parents resumed a relationship in Madison. Hope became reunited with her friends Lori and Tony, whom she had known since childhood. Her parents saw Lori as a bad influence. Hope began to self-harm at the age of 15.
Tony Lawrence was born February 14, 1976, in Madison. She was close friends with Hope since childhood. At age 9, she was abused by a relative, and age 14, she was raped by a teenage boy. The police only issued an order for the boy to keep away from her. After that incident, she began counseling, but that did not continue. In the 8th grade, she became promiscuous, began self-harm, and attempted suicide.
By far, these girls did not have good home lives or upbringing. Should that have made them murderous? Now, what could have happened to lead these girls to murder? Well, in 1990, then 14-year-old Melinda began dating a 16-year-old named Amanda Heavrin. When Melinda's father left the family and her mother remarried, Melinda began behaving increasingly erratically. Melinda would get into fights at school and reported being depressed. She did receive professional counseling. In March of 1991, Melinda told her mother that she was a lesbian, just like her other sisters. Her mother finally accepted it after being furious at first. As that year went on, Melinda and Amanda's relationship began to deteriorate.
In the fall semester, Amanda met Shanda at Hazelwood Middle School. Amanda started a fight with Shanda, and both had to attend detention, where they became friends and later exchanged romantic letters. Go to the police and show them. Do something.
January 10th, 1992, Lawrence, Rippey, and Tackett drove from Madison to Melinda's home in New Albany. Tony and Hope had never met Melinda before that night. When they arrived, they borrowed some clothes from Melinda, and Melinda showed them a knife that she was going to use to scare Shanda that night. Lori already knew of the plan to murder Shanda. None of the girls had ever met Shanda except for Melinda. Melinda explained to the girls that she disliked Shanda for being a copycat and stealing her girlfriend.
Shanda stayed in Jeffersonville with her dad on the weekends. Lori let Hope drive her car, stopping at McDonald's for directions. Shortly before dark, they arrived at Shanda's house. Melinda instructed Hope and Tony to go to the door and introduce themselves as friends of Amanda's. The girls went to the door, and when Shanda answered, the two asked for her, and she replied that she was Shanda. Hope and Tony asked Shanda to come with them to see Amanda, who they said was waiting for them at the Witch's Castle, or Mistletoe Falls, which is a ruined, stoned house located on an isolated hill overlooking the Ohio River.
Shanda was reluctant to go out, and she stated she had a party to attend and that they should come back in a few hours around midnight. Melinda was angry at first, but the other girls assured her about returning back later. The girls crossed the river to Louisville and attended a punk rock show. Melinda and Hope quickly lost interest in the music and went to the parking lot, where they engaged in sexual activities with two boys in the car.
The four girls eventually left for Shanda's house again. During the ride, Melinda said that she could not wait to kill Shanda, but she also said she intended to use the knife just to frighten her. They arrived at Shanda's house around 12:30 a.m. Tony refused to go to the door to get Shanda, so Lori and Hope went to the door instead, and Melinda hid under a blanket in the back seat along with the knife.
Shanda's father and stepmother had gone to bed and allowed Shanda to remain downstairs to watch television for a little bit. The girls told Shanda that Amanda was still waiting for them. Shanda was reluctant to go with them, but agreed to go after she changed her clothes. When they got in the car, Hope started asking her questions about her relationship with Amanda. Melinda then sprung out from under the back seat and put a knife to Shanda's throat and began asking her all about her sexual relations with Amanda.
When they arrived at the Witch's Castle, they took Shanda, who was sobbing at this point, inside and bound her arms and legs with rope. Melinda taunted her by saying she had pretty hair and wondered how pretty she would look if she was to cut it off. Melinda took Shanda's rings and handed them to the other girls. Hope took off Shanda's Mickey Mouse watch and began dancing to the tune it played. Lori taunted Shanda by saying the Witch's Castle was filled with human remains and that she, Shanda, would be next. To scare Shanda even more, Lori retrieved a shirt with a smiley design on the front from the car and set it on fire. Immediately they thought that the fire would be spotted by passing cars, so the girls left with Shanda.
Shanda continued to beg them to take her home. They did get lost and stopped at a gas station. Covering Shanda with a blanket, Lori went inside to ask for directions. While waiting for Lori, Tony called a boy she knew in Louisville and talked to him for several minutes to ease her worries. but she did not mention Shanda's abduction. They became lost again and pulled up to another gas station. Hope and Tony saw a couple of boys that they knew, and they chatted with them for a little bit before getting back in the car. Sometime later, they arrived at the edge of the woods near Lori's home in Madison.
In a densely forested area, Lori led them to a dark abandoned building off a logging road. Tony and Hope stayed in the car as they were frightened. Melinda and Lori made Shanda strip down to her underwear. Melinda beat her with her fist, and then she repeatedly slammed Shanda's face into her knee. Shanda's mouth was cut on her own braces. Melinda tried to slash Shanda's throat, but the knife was dull. Hope came out of the car to hold Shanda down, while Melinda and Lori took turns stabbing her in the chest. Then they strangled Shanda with a rope until she had passed out, and they put her in the trunk of the car. They told the other two that Shanda was dead.
The girls drove to Lori's house to clean themselves up and drink soda. They heard Shanda start screaming from the trunk of the car, and Lori went out with a paring knife and stabbed her several more times. When she re-entered the home, she was covered in blood. After she cleaned the blood off herself, Lori told the girls there were futures with her rune stones. At about 2:30 in the morning, Melinda and Lori went country cruising while the other two stayed behind. Shanda continued to make crying and gurgling sounds, so Lori stopped the car. When she opened the trunk, Shanda sat up. She was covered in blood and her eyes rolled back in her head, but she was unable to speak. Lori beat her with a tire iron until she was quiet. Lori claimed she felt Shanda's head caving in. Lori told Melinda to smell it. Next, they sexually assaulted Shanda with the tire iron. The tire iron assault continued on and off for several hours as the girls went on the joyride through the countryside.
Melinda and Lori returned to Lori's house just before daybreak to clean up and wake the other two girls. Hope asked about Shanda, and Lori laughingly described the torture. The laughing and conversation woke up Lori's mother, who was angry with her daughter for being out so late, but she offered to make them breakfast. Lori declined the offer for breakfast, saying she had to drive the other girls home. Instead of driving the other girls home, she drove them to a burn pile, where they opened the trunk to look at Shanda. Tony refused to look. Hope took a bottle of Windex and sprayed Shanda with it and taunted, "You're not looking so hot now, are you?"
The girls then drove to a gas station and pumped some gas into the car and bought a bottle of Pepsi, which they dumped out and filled with gas. They drove to a place known by Hope that had a field and a gravel country road. Tony remained in the car while Lori and Hope wrapped Shanda, who was still alive, in the blanket and carried her to a field. Hope poured some of the gasoline in the Pepsi bottle on Shanda and set her on fire. Melinda was not convinced that Shanda was dead, so they returned a few minutes later to pour the rest of the gasoline on her.
These girls then went to McDonald's for breakfast at about 9:30 a.m., where they laughed about Shanda's burned body looking like one of the sausages they were eating. Tony called a friend and told her about the murder. Lori then dropped Tony and Hope off at their homes and returned to her own home with Melinda. Melinda told Amanda that they had killed Shanda and arranged to pick up Amanda later that day with Lori.
A friend of Melinda's, Crystal Wathan, came over and the two girls told her what had happened. The three girls went to pick up Amanda and take her back to Melinda's home, where they told Amanda the story. Amanda and Crystal did not believe the story until Lori showed them the trunk of the car with Shanda's bloody handprint and bloody socks in it. Amanda was horrified and asked to be taken home. They pulled up in front of Amanda's house. Melinda kissed her, told her she loved her, and begged her not to tell anyone. Amanda promised as she entered the house.
On January 11, 1992, later in the morning, two brothers, Don and Ralph Foley, were driving to go hunting when they noticed what looked like a body on the side of the road. At first they thought it was a mannequin, but upon getting out of the car and closer, they realized that it was the burned body of a child. At 10:55, they called the police, who asked them to return to the corpse. State Trooper David Cam and Jefferson County Sheriff Buck Shipley and other detectives began an investigation, and the process of collecting forensic evidence at the scene. Initially, they suspected a drug deal gone wrong and did not believe a local had committed the crimes. It was also noted that the body was posed in a suggestive position, meaning that this was done on purpose and with intention. It was also noted that the victim's hands and face were burnt, attempting to keep her unrecognizable and unidentifiable. She was found with her arms outstretched and clutched fists as a result of death by burning.
Shanda's father noticed her daughter was nowhere to be found on January 11th. He phoned neighbors and friends all morning. He called his ex-wife, Shanda's mother, at 1:45 p.m. and met with him and the sheriff's office to file a missing person report. At approximately 8:20 p.m., a hysterical Tony and Hope, along with their parents, went to Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. Both girls gave rambling statements identifying the victim as Shanda. They named the other two girls as best as they could. They described the main events of that previous night. After an inter-county investigation, they contacted the Clark County Sheriff's Office and were able to match the burned body to Shanda's missing person report.
Shanda's autopsy report revealed that she had suffered multiple injuries. Ligature marks were found on her wrist. She also had several lacerations on her head, neck, and legs. Her fingers were in such distorted condition that they had to be cut off in order to take her prints. Her jaw was removed so that the dentist could make positive identification. The upper part of her body had third and fourth degree burns, and her tongue protruded through clenched teeth. Lacerations to her anus and rectum indicated a blunt object had been inserted at least 3.5 inches. The extent of the rectal bleeding showed that she had been alive at the time of that assault. The most revealing and worst of the report was the discovery of soot in the upper airway, indicating that she had been alive when she was set on fire. How did she live through all that torture?
Detectives obtained dental records of Shanda and were able to positively identify Shanda as the victim. Melinda and Lori were arrested on January 12th. The bulk of the evidence for the arrest came from the statements made by Tony and Hope. The prosecution immediately declared to try both Melinda and Lori as adults. The prosecution and the defense attorney for months did not release any information about the case. They gave the news media only the statements by Tony and Hope. All four girls accepted a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty, and they were tried as adults.
These girls had troubled home lives with claims of physical and sexual abuse committed by a parent or other adult. Lori, Hope, and Tony had histories of self-harm. Lori was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and suffered from hallucinations. Melinda, who was often described as the ringleader of the attack, had the most extensive history of abuse and mental issues. Does their past histories and bad home lives excuse the girls for what they had done?
Melinda and Lori were sentenced to only 60 years for the torture and murder of Shanda, which, let's not forget, was planned. Lori was released in January of 2018 and served 1 year of probation. Melinda was released in September of 2019. Hope was sentenced to 60 years plus 10 years suspended by mitigating circumstances, plus 10 years of medium supervision probation. On appeal, a judge reduced the sentence to 35 years in exchange for her cooperation. Tony was allowed to plead guilty to 1 count of criminal confinement and was sentenced to a maximum of 20 years.
Melinda appealed her sentence, but it was upheld by the Indiana Supreme Court in 1994. In October 2007, Melinda's attorney sought post-conviction relief from the Jefferson Circuit Court that originally sentenced her. Melinda's lawyer argued that Melinda had been profoundly retarded by childhood abuse, also that she had not been represented competently by counsel during her sentencing, which caused her to accept a plea bargain in the face of exaggerating claims about her receiving the death penalty. Her attorney also argued that Melinda was just 16 years old when she signed the plea agreement and was too young to enter into a contract in the state of Indiana without consent from a parent or guardian, which had not been obtained. If a judge accepted these arguments, Melinda could have been retried or released immediately.
On January 8, 2008, Melinda's request was rejected by the judge. Melinda would be eligible for parole in 15 years, maintaining the original guilty plea. On November 14, 2008, the appeal was denied by the Indiana Court of Appeals, upholding the judge's ruling. Toni Lawrence was released on December 14, 2000 after serving 9 years. She remained on parole until December 2002. Hope Ripley was released after serving 14 years of her original sentence, and she remained on supervised parole for 5 years until April 2011. Lori Tackett was released on January 11, 2018, and it just so happens to be the 26th anniversary of Shanda's death. Lori had served nearly 26 years. She completed an additional year of parole. Melinda Loveless was released on September 5, 2019, and had served just 26 years in prison. She will serve parole in Jefferson County, Kentucky.
During Melinda's sentencing hearing, extensive open court testimony revealed that her father had abused his wife, his daughters, and other children. He was arrested in February 1993 on charges of rape, sodomy, and sexual battery. It was determined that most of the crimes occurred from 1968 to 1977. Larry remained in prison awaiting trial for over 2 years. The judge eventually ruled that all the charges except one of sexual battery had to be dropped because of the statute of limitations, which in Indiana is 5 years.
Larry pleaded guilty to one count of sexual battery, and he was released in June 1995 with time served. A few weeks after his release, Larry tried to sue Floyd County Jail for $39 million in federal court, saying that he had suffered cruel and unusual punishment during his first 2 years of incarceration. His complaints included that he was not allowed to sleep in his bed during the day or to read newspapers. Larry would die in a car accident in 1998.
Shanda's father, Stephen, died of alcoholism in 2005 at the age of 53. In an interview with Jackie Vaught, Shanda's mother, she stated that he was so distraught by his daughter's murder that he did everything he could to kill himself besides put a gun to his head, and that he drank himself to death. The man definitely died of a broken heart.
Thank you for tuning in to Bloodstained Backstories. Don't forget to follow us on social media to stay updated, share your thoughts, and connect with your fellow true crime enthusiasts. You can catch us anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your go-to platform. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Join us next week as we uncover another chilling case. Until then, stay safe and stay curious.